Yeah. Can I be heard and seen?
Yes, on both.
All right, perfect. Give me a second. I sense a debate that's going to be quite messy. So, the way we're going to approach this on opening government is not give you seven reasons why nuclear conflict might happen and seven reasons, and allow opening opposition to give you seven other reasons why it won't. But I'll first prove why there's likely to be conflict around the world at all points in time across the next 100 years. Then I'll prove why this is likely to lead to one country being backed into a corner, which is then likely to lead to that one country using the access to nuclear weaponry that it will likely have. So, first, why is it likely that there's always going to be a conflict around the world at some point in time? Six reasons. The first is that there are often competing interests and resources because of the fact that there's resource scarcity. So things like water, certain minerals, and energy often lead to things like conflict, especially in certain regions where resources are unevenly distributed. Note, secondly, that nations and groups often have conflicting economic interests, whether it comes to things like trade, investment, or control over things like critical infrastructure, which means there are often competing interests which compete head on. The second is that there are often geopolitical rivalries. There are multiple. Israel Palestine is one, Russia, the US, China, the US, multiple across the world. And there are often individual reasons why these people fight, things like influence on the global sphere, territory, strategic advances, etc. Lots of these conflicts are often rooted in things like historical grievances, which persist over time, which often contribute to things like ongoing tensions. The third is that there are often ethnic and ideological differences between countries, so identity crises between countries, often particularly seen within the Asian countries, like for instance Pakistan, India. Fourth is that in many cases there are often political instability over very key countries which are also quite powerful, like Pakistan, for instance, having multiple military coups recently, or internal conflicts between countries which have often led to external actors pushing themselves onto these countries because of things like the military industrial complex. The fifth is that there's often economic inequality, and people within the global poor recognize this economic disparity. But beyond that, they recognize the failure of institutions within the West and international institutions at being able to fix these global disparities, which means lots of people have fueled resentment against countries like the US. But beyond that, they have fueled resentment against countries like the UN, especially due to things like lack of action and apathy towards things like developmental challenges across the world. The sixth is that there's often obviously technological and military advancements for two structural reasons. One, people are simply becoming a lot educated insofar as lots of people or more people end up going to university, and therefore they have lots of education which they can then utilize. Not to mention, a lot of this education is simply available online and open source. But second, lots of governments themselves are ramping up on their military capacity and their military advancements, especially with the rise of private contractors who can simply go to and access the technology. This gives you six reasons why in all points in time across the 200 so countries, there's always likely to be one conflict which persists. Second, why are governments often not held to check with the threats that they use? And here's where I want to add a bit of nuance to the debate. In a lot of instances, the reasons why countries are likely to end up getting nuclear weapons is because they fear another country that's also going to end up having nuclear weapons. I'll prove later on why they're going to be able to access these weapons, but I'll prove the incentive right now. The reason why they want to access this is because in many cases, governments across the West and even certain governments across the East are not held to check with the threats that they make regarding nuclear conflict, especially at the point at which lots of people within their voter base tend to be somewhat apathetic towards the claims of nuclear violence, means that lots of countries, especially within the US, are able to use blanket threats of nuclear weaponry on the global sphere, which then leads to other countries panicking or people within those countries expecting their government to ramp up their military. What happens when you push actors into a corner? One, they're obviously scared. Two, they're afraid. Three, they're often very angry. Note the US and many other countries often wield the biggest sticks in global geopolitical affairs. And this has been true for the better part of the last 100 years, and they've used that to continuously oppress these other countries. Make no mistake, when the US does things like pushes back against Russia, against Iran, or other countries, it's likely to garner significant ground. It is likely to win the prospect, and this often terrifies lots of specific leaders. It terrifies all the Ayatollahs and the Putins of the world who preemptively expand their nuclear arsenal and develop nuclear weapons by doing things like enriching uranium where they did when they did not otherwise do so. Note, insofar as they are backed into a corner, and this is likely to happen at some point, they're going to fire off a nuclear bomb, presumably because of this, anyways. Why is it likely that you're going to back them into a corner? This is very simple. The military industrial complex obviously incentivizes constant conflict. Look at the amount of lobbying and regulatory capture done by firms like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. Look at the revolving door that exists between defense contractors and the Pentagon. Constant war is profitable for the PMCs, and they're likely to consistently push on this. So why are they likely to access nuclear weaponry? Multiple reasons. The first is that there's advances in nuclear technology, and these fields fields, especially insofar as things like civilian nuclear power makes it very easy for countries to acquire the necessary knowledge, but beyond the technology required for nuclear programs. But second, many technologies used in civilian nuclear power is also adaptable for military purposes, which means that you raise the risk of proliferation insofar as lots of these countries are likely to develop nuclear energy infrastructure. So, for instance, both nuclear power plants and nuclear weaponry often rely upon nuclear fission reactions. So, in order for but beyond that, like the basic principles of things like nuclear chain reactions also apply to both reactors and weapons. So, and a lot of these kinds of the fuels that you end up using are also similar. So uranium-235 and plutonium-239 are both used in nuclear reactors for fuel, but they're also used critically in nuclear weapons. The only difference right now is that you don't have enrichment of nuclear uranium, because you have used low enriched uranium for reactors, whereas you use high enriched uranium for weapons. The difference is that it's very easy to enrich uranium, and countries are often only not doing this right now because of things like international agreements, international trade, which people are already continuously like reducing the view of, because of the perception that these agreements aren't that important. I'll get to this a lot more. But fourth, note that insofar as there are global energy crises, that global energy needs that are going to grow, countries are likely to end up having to increase their nuclear reliance to do things like meet demands for electricity or reduce reliance on fossil fuels. Is there any clarification thus far?
At best, you have proven that some type of conflict may happen. This does not meet your burden of showing it is the type of conflict capable of causing nuclear war.
So here's my second point. Why is it at the point at which you have a conflict, you're going to end up reacting irrationally? There are two reasons why this is true. The first is that in many cases, the kinds of governments we're talking about are governments which are somewhat irrational because they tend to be dictatorships, or they get into power through strongman politics and strongman ideologies, which means countries have a direct incentive to want to weaponize the fact that their leaders themselves are somewhat strong. The second reason for why this is likely is because insofar as this is obviously something that happens across the world, it's likely you fear another country which is going to utilize their nuclear weapons against you, especially with unstable actors like Iran, for instance, gaining access to things like nuclear weaponry, or Israel or whatever. The fact of the matter is that the perception that there's another country which is willing to pull the bomb or pull the trigger on you means that you want to preemptively do this in order to take them out. Either this happens in a way that leads to some other country reacting, or one country ends up shooting a nuclear weapon, which then leads to other countries retaliating against this country because of things like agreements. The reason why this is critical is because insofar as countries themselves tend to be preemptively scared, and they're often run by people who are also quite capable of doing this, and who have very little trust in the global democratic system or the global participation system because of apathy towards things like the Israel Palestine conflict, lots of people recognize that there's very little checks and balances in place for other countries to stop utilizing nukes against them, so they preemptively use nukes against other countries. Very proud to win on opening up.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for those very fine remarks. All right, thank you very much, Leader of Opposition, for those very fine remarks. Now, closing the case in the opening government, DPM, you're here.
Cool. Am I clearly audible and clearly visible?
Yes.
To those of you who are comfortable doing so, can you turn your cameras on? I find it makes the debate a lot more lively and fun to watch and to listen to and to argue for. The second thing I'll request is POIs verbally, as I cannot see the chat. Beginning my speech momentarily. The first thing I will do is weigh on likelihood before rebuilding our case on increased capacity. Then I'm going to prove three burdens. One, why we're backed into a corner. Two, why rogue states react irrationally when they're losing on the ground. Third, on MAD, hair trigger systems, and terrorism to burn out closing government. First, I'm going to weigh on likelihood. Over 200 conflicts in the past 76 years have happened. If you believe our analysis on more states having increased capacity to use nuclear weaponry, we only need to show you that one of the 200 conflicts going forward, that is 0.5% of global conflict, result in nuclear war, given the later analysis I'll give on mutually assured destruction hair trigger systems. I now want to rebuild on increased capacity, which is the sole response and positive material we get from opening opposition. Here are three reasons why you have increased capacity in the next 76 years as opposed to the last 76 years. One, a spread of technology over time between bad actors, insofar as there's a game theoretic incentive for actors like Russia to want to help out Iran to create a regional network of deterrence to stop the US from intervening in these particular fields. Secondarily, there's a strong scientific base over time. If you're Iran, you can build up domestic nuclear programs that you spend decades working and investing in Insofar as Zaakir already proves the incentive, this is the capacity. But third, there's a lack of international oversight because the International Atomic Energy Agency lacks enforcement. They need opt-in to gain access to nuclear facilities domestically, and if you're a rogue state and don't give them this opt-in, you can construct whatever the fuck you want. But secondarily, it's likely that more actors gain access to nuclear weaponry. And the reason why this is important is because of what Zaakir tells you, which is that insofar as the conflicts in the world are likely to increase and not decrease, countries are likely to default to nuclear weaponry in times when they're desperate. The only response we get from opening opposition is they say, why will it be nuclear warfare? The reason it'll be nuclear warfare as opposed to cyber warfare is because they know how to build nuclear warfare today so they can begin investment in the production of nuclear weaponry today. The problem with all of opening opposition's alternatives is they're highly speculative. I don't even know if they fucking exist. I don't know if you know if they exist. I don't think this is something you ought to credit within the debate. First burden then, why are you backed into a corner? And I have 3 reasons for this. 1, the military-industrial complex incentivizes constant conflict, as Zaakir told you, to no response, insofar as constant war is profitable for private military corporations. Secondarily, there's a massive amount of resource scarcity, which gets worse over time as the world's population grows and climate change worsens the amount of resources available. But third, there's a lack of government accountability, because economic issues like inflation are more proximate to the median voter than the hypothetical issue of nuclear war. All this means there's likely to be a conflict with a state like Iran or North Korea, and are likely to default to nuclear weaponry because they're likely to lose the war on the ground to a more powerful actor like the United States or China. But secondarily, why do these rogue states react irrationally when they're losing on the ground? And here I want to psychologically frame the way in which leaders of these states react when they're feeling pressured and when they're feeling concerned, when they're backed into a corner. 1, revenge. When you've lost your country, when you've lost the war, when you've lost your empire, when you've lost what you believe God has granted you, in the case of theocratic states like Iran, you feel a degree of anger towards the actors you blame for defeating you, as well as a degree of futility. That's why you fire off a nuclear bomb. That's why actors like the Soviet Union were prepared to fire off a nuclear bomb if the US struck them in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. But secondarily, there's no other alternative. That is, you're likely to buy into the sunk cost fallacy, which is this fallacy of you psychologically gearing towards believing that winning the war matters the most if you're a mullah in the Taliban or someone like Vladimir Putin, and willing to take the risk believing that your missile defense systems can shoot down the enemy's nukes, but they can't shoot down your nukes insofar as that's the only way to win the war. I want to explain why this is strategically important, because insofar as opening opposition implicitly concedes that the US will be the world's strongest military power no matter what in the next 30 or 40 years, or if not the US, an actor that is of similar size to the US like China or Russia, it is likely that whatever conflicts the US engages in, they'll garner the upper hand, which is what creates the incentive to do this nuclear warfare in the first place. I now want to extend on terrorism and MAD hair trigger systems. The concept of nuclear deterrence relies on the idea that one strike cannot incapacitate a nation's capacity to deliver a response to a nuclear attack, because then the side that attacks first wins. That's why countries have instituted mutually assured destruction systems, which automatically detect nuclear weapons in the atmosphere, and that a hair trigger's notice fire nuclear weapons back towards the other actor in the direction that it came from. That is why oftentimes there isn't a human review, but nuclear war will happen automatically when these nuclear bombs start flying in the air. The reason why that's important is because if any bad actor gains access to a nuclear bomb and fires it, the US or China or any other powerful actor will likely automatically send out dozens of bombs and the world will go boom. And this is especially true for actors like ISIS. Why are terrorist organizations likely to have access to these bombs in the next 76 years? I have 3 reasons for this. 1, terrorist activities are tremendously profitable, such as the production of opium activities in Afghanistan, such as financing arms distributions across the Sahel. Secondarily, you can steal them from a facility from a country with weak security infrastructure like Pakistan, which is magnified by Zaakir's analysis, because insofar as we prove that more countries gain access to nuclear weapons in the long term, there are more potential targets that ISIS or similar terrorist organizations can go after. Before I go on, this back half of a POI.
Yeah, so I like frequentism statistics. You mentioned 200 wars in the last 80 years. What is 0 divided by 200 as a probability?
Yeah, so the point we were trying to tell you is that in the next 76 years, there are far more countries that gain access to nuclear warfare and the nuclear weaponry, but also the incentives of these actors shift. You can't just ignore Zaakir's analysis and pretend like he didn't say what he said for the first 6 minutes of his speech. But third, why is it the case you're likely to gain access to these bombs? And I have 2 more mechanisms here. The third mechanism is that it is often in the incentive of rogue actors like the Ayatollahs or whatever to literally give you access to a nuclear bomb and have you fire it off from a different location, insofar as it potentially cripples your largest and most significant enemy without incurring pushback upon you domestically. But fourth, the reason why I'm likely to be able to garner access is because insofar as terrorist organizations often have a lot of capital, over the next 80 odd years, they can invest in their own nuclear programs. They can kidnap and force scientists to produce nuclear weapons for them by holding them hostage. And the upshot of this is that one bad actor across the next 80 years is likely to fire a nuclear bomb. When they do, this is likely to result in retaliatory action. This is a debate about likelihood. We have proven our claims with the highest degree of certainty. For those reasons, I beg you to propose.
All right, thank you very much, DPM, for those very fine remarks. And to close the opening half, Diallo now, please. You're here.
Am I perfectly audible?
Yes.
Okay, amazing. I'll take POIs through chat, so please don't unmute yourself unless it's like the 6th minute, then go ahead. Let me set up my timer. All right. Starting in 3, 2, and 1. Conflicts will exist in every single reality we predict in this debate. The escalation to a nuclear war, however, is not likely to happen in any single one of those. We are very proud to oppose. Let's look at what we get from the very shallow case of OG. Firstly, like a million reasons why conflict is going to exist. I'm just going to ignore that because that is literally irrelevant. But secondly, they go on to talk about how irrational governments rule the countries that are likely to engage in nuclear war, and therefore they will they will engage in these warfares because of these conflicts that exist, right? Panel firstly recognize that usually these areas that they talk about that are under like dictatorships or run under like extremely unstable situations are usually areas that turn into centers for proxy war for countries like the US or Russia, right? So these irrational governments are going to need nuclear backup. If I can prove to you why the US does not engage in any form of nuclear warfare and Russia does not engage in any form of nuclear warfare, we can essentially prove to you that no retaliatory actions happen, which means that their argument falls, right? But secondly, recognize that the US, the West in general, right, the P3 of the NATO, have an incentive to stop outright nuclear warfare from happening and the normalization of it, because recognize, and I'll extend on this further, but recognize that to stop a nuclear war, they're essentially going to ensure that the normalization of this does not happen. I'll extend on that later. But thirdly, they talk about the access to nuclear weapons and the capacity. In terms of access panel, access to nuclear weapons does not lead to the usage of them. That is a mechanism that opening government is missing. And I'll talk about this further further in my speech, but recognize that access to nuclear weapons generally acts as a deterrence, because recognize knowing that another rival country has access to nuclear weapons is essentially going to stop you from launching it towards them, because then you risk civilian casualties on your side as well. This is a losing game. This is a battle that you're not going to win. We think that countries in their right minds are not going to engage in it. Secondly, in terms of capacity, I don't know what they talk about when they say that countries are in general going to just start mass producing nuclear weapons, because recognize no matter what future you talk about, the capacity to create nuclear weapons is still going to be exponentially difficult, right? But recognize that the actors that they talk about are probably going to be actors that still continue, actors like this unstable governments they talk about are essentially still going to be governments who have difficulty to access these informations and are probably going to depend on A, the West, or B, the West's enemies, which means that we just need to prove to you that this does not that they don't supply weapons for nuclear warfare, and therefore we take this debate, right? So firstly, in terms of why the US, no, I'll take it through chat. Firstly, in terms of why the US and the other NATO members have no incentive to launch a nuclear warfare. A key framing here, right? Because recognize OG's best case is that rogue nations, or if I want to include CG, then rogue organizations too will strike back against the West. If we can prove they don't engage, we take the debate. Recognize how the countries they that could potentially be at war with are unstable in structure, right? Recognize that countries like let's say North Korea, or countries like Russia or China, right? Because recognize that the leaders who are in power here don't generally care about civilian casualties towards their country when they themselves are being attacked, right? The problem here is that recognize the US knows that if you do try to attack North Korea, they might strike back, which means that the possibility that the US is going to launch the US or the West is going to launch a warfare on their own does not exist. But secondly, recognize that these the countries in the West are in general in a more stable position right now, and they have nothing to gain from making their position unstable, because if you do launch an attack on the other bigger rivals that you do have, like Russia and China and Korea, you have nothing to gain from it. Thirdly, the US does not retaliate on an eye for an eye principle, and this is a direct clash with side government, right? And I'm assuming CG is going to come up with this as well. We have witnessed America's reaction to past nuclear threats. This deals with CG's argument about militant groups or extremist groups gaining access to nuclear weapons as well. I'm assuming that's what they mean from the POI. But understand that the US tends to resort to things like military interventions because they do not want to engage in actions that cause severe civilian casualties. Why does this happen? Two reasons here. Firstly, because first of all, they want to maintain their position as a global watchdog. Secondly, because the US gets a lot of benefit through acting as the voice of morality for the world. We think that the significant benefits that they receive from acting as sort of the moral police for the entire world is something that the US does not in general want to risk, right? But secondly, we think that but fourthly, we think that because of the significant harms that cause to their economy, the West are in general going to be reluctant to launch a nuclear warfare and are going to seek out alternative options to engage in warfare, or alternative options like economic tariffs or other things that are essentially through which they can essentially create some form of consequences for their rival nations. We think that they're more likely to do this because recognize these countries are in the best economic position right now, and they are countries who want to maintain this position of power, right? We think that they are unlikely to essentially remove this for themselves. But secondly, why the other countries are not likely to engage in nuclear warfare with the West as well. But before I move on, I'll take closing if there's one.
Cool. So here's an actual extension. So the previous one was a lie. Let's assume Kim Jong-un suddenly gets diagnosed with cancer and is going to die tomorrow. Literally, what are the reasons stopping him from just fucking the world and just pressing the big red button?
First of all, that's a very unlikely situation. But secondly, we think that if you're talking about one person fucking US over, I think the US has precedents of where they carried out targeted assassinations, they carried out targeted operations, like in case of bin Laden, where they essentially instead of laying waste to an entire fucking country through launching a nuclear weapon, what they generally do is they conduct targeted attacks, right? We think that these are things that still exist, and the US is more and more likely to engage in these things. But secondly, why the other countries are not likely to engage in nuclear warfare as well? Panel, understand all of these countries that exist as the US's or the West in general, rivals, are essentially countries that are aware that NATO as a team is pretty strong, and they're likely to remain this way because of different geopolitical reasons, but also because of their current economic standing in the world, right? But secondly, because they have nothing to gain from it, right? Because recognize either these countries are trying to gain ties with the US or trying to get ties with their allies, right? Or with their rivals. We think that they have nothing to gain from launching a nuclear warfare against an entire fucking giant of a country, right? But thirdly, we think that the access to nuclear weapons does not automatically translate to the use of it. And this is something that I hope CG defends, because OG does a shit job at it. But basically, it rather acts as a deterrence mechanism for other countries. The US is not fucking stupid, right? It could start a nuclear war with North Korea today, but they won't, because North Korea too has access to nuclear weapons and they're aware of it. The access to nuclear weapons essentially means that if you fuck me over, I can fuck you over too. This is not to prove that they're going to use these things. It's just to prove that probably you and I have either similar capacity of power or similar capacity to cause damage. We think that this acts as a deterrence mechanism, not as a possibility to launch an overall nuclear warfare. For all these reasons, vote OO.
Cool. Thank you very much, Diallo, for those very kind remarks. That's the end of the opening health debate. Proceeding swiftly to the closing health. Member of the opening health, please. Here.
Hello. Hi everyone. Can I be heard and seen fine?
Yep, I'm fine.
Okay, amazing. All right, let me just quickly gather my notes. 2 main extensions in the speech. First off, why we think that in the next 100 years, nuclear weapons will become less dangerous. And secondly, why legacy securing means that warlords in the status quo will actually fire nuclear weapons in the long run. Firstly, on nuclear weapons being less dangerous. I would note, opening government does a really, really good job in this debate, debating the wrong debate, because they give you many reasons for why war might exist in the next 100 years. We completely agree with them. But the problem with this argumentation is that they don't prove why they'll use nukes within these wars in the first place. This to say, right? Like, yeah, maybe North Korea and Iran will be like pushed towards a corner, right? But that doesn't mean that they'll use nukes. Why can't they use like other types of weaponry and other types of technology to beat, like, to fight off other nations from attacking them? This was something that was made unclear from the opening half of this debate. This is where we come in with an extension, because we say that military technological development that will occur in the next 100 years means that the relative severity of nukes in the status quo will decrease and people will be more willing to use it because mutually assured destruction will not apply anymore. The intuition pump for this is this. During World War I, no one wanted to use these new like bomber ships called dreadnoughts, right? Because they were so fucking destructive, they were so expensive, they were like the new technology, the new kids on the block. No one wanted to fight each other with it because they're scared that they're going to be used against them. But now battleships are fucking used everywhere, right? They surveil waters all the time. Because the reason behind this is because more fucked up shit were created, and this has shifted the Overton window for what is actually bad and what is severe in the status quo. We give you 3 reasons for why we think technological weapons will further develop on our side of the house, on either side of the house. The first reason is because the military-industrial complex, companies like Lockheed Martin, right, that will point out from the opening government, gets paid all the time to innovate more destructive shit for the government, right? Because they want to use this type of stuff in order to fucking fuck over other countries in the status quo. So technological development in R&D is constantly occurring within the status quo for military technology. But the second reason behind this is note that nuclear weapons are no longer the crown jewels it was 50 years ago, because more and more actors are getting their hands onto nuclear weapons. Countries such as North Korea, countries such as Iran and China, that the United States actively wants to beat. Therefore, to get ahead, US and other large powers in the status quo will want to actively find the next big thing, the next destructive thing that they can use against each other in order for them to be able to have a military superiority over other countries. This means that, crucially, more destructive shit compared to nuclear weapons will be developed on either sides of the house by military powers that exist in the status quo. Note then, the incentive structures of why states don't want to use the things like nuclear weapons in the status quo is this. All teams agree it's mutually assured destruction, right? Which to say, on either side of the house, we're really fucking scared that somebody is going to use nuclear weapons against us. Therefore, we don't want to use nuclear weapons against them. Opening opposition challenges us to give us a reason for why MAD is not going to exist on our side. Here's why. 2 reasons. 1, because this will change in 100 years because the Overton window for what is a destructive weapon is going to shift within the eyes and psyche of the US government and other large powers in the world. This is because states don't think that destroying 1,000 acres is that bad with a nuclear weapon when they now have weapons that can destroy 10,000 acres, right? That are much, much more fucking destructive. So therefore, in their eyes, things like nuclear weapons are not that fucking scary anymore. But secondly, mutually assured destruction requires you as an actor to be scared of people retaliating back with nuclear weapons. The problem with the status quo, is that there's nothing worse. The problem on their side, on either side, is that in 100 years, people are going to be less scared of nuclear weapons as a whole because of the fact that they have much more scary weapons as a whole. That's why people aren't scared of fucking tanks anymore, right? Therefore, mutually assured destruction does not apply here to the point in which there are much more destructive weapons that are going to exist on their side of the house. This is something that we think is going to happen there. Secondly, I want to quickly talk about legacy securing. We have 2 layers under this. The first one is under Kim Jong-un, because OG tries to tell us that the reason why North Korea will use nukes in the long run is because resources will get scared. Like, bruh, their asses have been sanctioned for the past like 1,000 years, right? They haven't been able to get anything for the past like fucking 10, 20 years by anyone, but nothing has happened. They haven't used fucking nukes, right? The reason behind this is because North Korea is not a state that relies on resources to begin with. Like 90% of their fucking country is starving, bro. Like, you think they care about resources? I highly fucking doubt it. As long as like, you know, Kim Jong-un can eat McDonald's, they're probably chilling. So I would say that this isn't the actual incentive mechanism for why Kim Jong-un is going to use nuclear weapons in the long run. This is our extension. I think it's important to understand the incentive structures of Kim Jong-un and Kim's regime. There's two things to know under this. The first thing is that they want to seem extremely capable. They want to seem that they're very, very good. They want to seem like they're very strong and like very smart and things like that. This is why he made a rumor such as the fact that he can make a hole-in-one every time he plays golf, right? The second reason behind this is because they want to seem strong to the rest of the world. They want to seem like a military power, somebody who can challenge the likes of the United States with their own dictatorial regime and ideology. This is something that's really, really crucial towards the incentive structures of Kim Jong-un and what keeps the Kim propaganda alive within the status quo in North Korea. Given these incentive structures, look at how Kim Jong-un structured the propaganda and message of his regime. It is solely through nuclear power. For the past 20 years, he has been telling people that he has effective nukes. He can use these nukes. These nukes are very, very powerful and can like fucking destroy the United States and things like that, right? So to that extent, the only way for him to secure his legacy is to shoot a nuke towards somebody somewhere else, right? To shoot a nuke towards the United States or even South Korea, probably more likely, in order for him to secure his legacy. Because first off, it shows that the past 20 years and all the resources he had to use to that his justification for using all the resources in North Korea towards a military project was actually effective within like their country. But secondly, also sends a message that fends off other countries from wanting to attack him from attack North Korea in the long run as well. So given that Kim will most likely die in the next 100 years, right? It's probably likely. I think I'm gonna die in the next 100 years, and he's probably older than me. So to that extent, we would say that before he dies, mutually assured destruction doesn't fucking apply anymore, right? Because he's going to fucking die. So that means that he's going to shoot a nuke in order to fucking secure his legacy as somebody who is highly capable and actually did what he promised towards the North Korean people. The response that we heard coming from the opposition side was that, yeah, but the US won't retaliate against North Korea even if they shoot a nuke. No, they most definitely will. The reason behind this is because of a signaling effect. If the other people are able to see that North Korea can shoot the United States with a nuclear weapon without any fucking consequences, guess what? They're probably going to try and shoot the United States as well, right? So they need to retaliate in order for them to stay strong within the geopolitical sphere of the world. And that's why we would say the United States actively has incentives to try and will retaliate. To that extent, we're very, very proud to stand on closing opposition. Government.
All right, gotcha. Thank you very much, Member of Gulf, for those very fine remarks. Now moving on to the next speaker, Member of Gulf. You're here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Just a moment. PO is in chat. I'll take OG. I want to start with CG because I think they're like a weird mix of like derivative and then weird when they aren't. And I want to make like just two observations as to why their case just doesn't work. The first one is that they just premise everything they say on this claim about the Overton window over like what a destructive weapon is shifting. Two observations here. One, the only two nukes to ever be fired were around 16 kilotons. See Hiroshima. The biggest nuclear weapon we had by the end of the Cold War was 3,000 times more powerful than this. Notably, panel, I still think everyone here thinks Hiroshima was a humanitarian disaster that ought never be repeated. I just don't think it's true that you become desensitized to this degree and scale of destruction and loss of life. What this means then is that they have given you a single very flimsy mech for the argument, and they would have to explain why this is magically going to change. I don't think human sensibilities to the most basic type of harm, death, and suffering, and things like radiation disease are suddenly going to change. Beyond this, though, I just think that the case is just like so incredibly speculative. Like, I don't know if CG are holding themselves out to be like weapons development experts to tell me that you're going to have this type of like new development by 2100. And even if it does, I just don't think it's the case that this implies that nuclear weapons are suddenly fine. At this point then, let's explain why the extension wins this debate. Look, I want to be very clear about what the government burden is. They have to convince you that it's likely that a nuclear war that annihilates the globe will happen, and not just happen, but by 2100. Let me explain to the Gov bench of humanities students how the multiplication of probabilities actually works. Let me be very generous here and assume they have proven a 10% chance annually that an actor acquires nukes and 10% that they will want to use new nukes, which I note is a heavy overestimation of how likely these things are. There's still only a 1% chance per year of a nuclear war happening. Even with these numbers, the expected time for a nuclear war to happen is still 100 years, which will be 2125. They will still not have discharged their burden in this debate, even in this very generous estimation of the case. Notably, they have to prove far more than these two burdens, and the joinder of the events is far less likely. Don't let them fearmonger you by just asserting things which are possible, but without giving sufficient possibility to it being plausible. Similar thought experiment, it's very scary that your plane might collapse, but this means that people overestimate the chance of that happening compared to how unlikely it is that the plane would collapse in the first place. Beyond this though, just look at the empirical evidence of the last 79 years. Note what the world's been through the Cold War, one of the most tense moments during which nuclear war could have happened. We saw the Cuban Missile Crisis. We saw Operation Able Arrow, where the Soviet Union thought the West was about to declare war. We saw the Soviet Union thinking that weapons had been fired at it because of a technical mistake. We saw things like the India-Pakistan conflict or like Israeli-Iranian hostilities. None of these cases, which entailed open conflict between nuclear powers, saw the firing of a single nuclear weapon in the last 79 years. At this point, we don't have to explain to you why things are going to stay the same. Gov would need to explain how they get a substantial change, and I don't think they have proven this magic link in this debate to make their case even near 50% likely. Let's go through then the burdens and not just point out that they haven't proven them, but show why they cannot actually prove them because they're false. Even if you could theoretically acquire nukes, almost all countries won't make this investment. And I'm going to give you 5 reasons to argue this. Firstly, you understand the risk of mutual annihilation. This means that you know that you won't be able to effectively deploy this nuke in any conflict you're likely to see. The second reason is that it's a very expensive investment for no effect. Nuclear weapons are not just stored in a warehouse. They need continual maintenance, specialized facilities that are kept under idealized conditions, and have incredibly high maintenance and replacement costs. The third reason is that you can still achieve all the same geopolitical goals in a war, but without triggering a nuclear-capable scenario. You initiate regional conflicts without declaring war, much like Russia did in Ukraine. The other side in the war will never want to be the one to escalate, and they have the burden on them. As in, it's the case that you keep moving the goalposts, such as you never make it appear like a war, and they're never going to interpreted as such because of the consequences of them declaring war on you. Fourthly, though, it is enough that your powerful regional ally has a nuke for you not to be bullied. That is, it's not necessary for every single ally of Iran to get its own nuke, or for every ally of Russia like Belarus to develop its nuclear program, because you know you have somebody else who can do the same job for you. Therefore, I just don't think you do that. But also, fifthly, nukes are going to become and have become far less effective. This is because of the development we have seen of things like intelligent interception missiles against nukes, or satellite systems that just stop the nukes before they can reach the country. Therefore, this is just an expensive piece of waste that you won't buy. Even if you get nukes, though, you just will never reach the circumstances to necessitate them being fired, which is the second burden they fail to miss. 4 reasons here. Firstly, there are huge economic incentives against conflict because of the interconnection of the global economy. No country wants to engage in major war anymore, especially with another nuclear power. Secondly, though, the world has become progressively more democratic over time. This inherently means that as more countries find it more difficult to justify conflict with their educated workforces or the economic losses, they just don't engage in these types of war. Third reason, though, is that your enemy knows not to push you to the brink of destruction, because that is when you will fight the hardest. They have nothing to gain by pushing you to non-existence, and they just don't do this. This neutralizes the Gov bench claim that you're somehow going to be brought near extinction. Fourthly, though, your enemy is aware that you're going to nuke them if they do this to you, so you're never going to see the US invading and toppling Iran in the first place. Yeah, Arjun, go.
Your claim is contingent on a series of spec knowledge about nuclear weaponry that the ARV doesn't know. Our claim is only...
It's really not. I'm sorry, stop, please. Okay, at this point then, even if an authoritarian position were brought to a position of near death, why would they still not fire? Few things here. One, it would still be incredibly dangerous and uncertain. even if you're the mad person, GovBench claims, you still wouldn't fire for the very simple reason. Many of these weapons are old or haven't been reliably tested to know that they will fire. Not a huge risk. You're firing a missile from the ground of your country to basically go to the enemy state. The problem is, if this explodes above your own country when you do this, it will be a massive dirty bomb that destroys you, your resources, and any opportunity you have of winning. Even if you're the most self-interested person in this debate, you are still going to be unlikely to choose this at the point at which you would have disastrous consequences on those selfish interests. But beyond this, I still think you wouldn't do it. That is because, A, even if you're insane, you often still believe in the afterlife. I just don't think it's true that you're going to cause this much harm, knowing what the judgment of God is going to be. Finally, though, I just think it's incredibly likely the military coups you if you try this for no good reason. That is, if you won't be sensible, the people with the guns will. Look, GovBench in this debate is just like incredibly low probability. Don't get them get away with like claiming otherwise. I'm very proud to win from closing opposition.
All right. Thank you very much, member of opposition, for those verified remarks. Now, as the last speaker in the Gov bench, I'd like to call upon the Gov whip to speak. You're here.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, good.
All right, cool. POIs in chat, I'll take opening up. Big shout out to friends and family, especially Atlas. We debated through the night, and I think we should be proud of that. We should also be proud of our case, which I'm about to whip. All right, okay, I'm gonna get started. Closing opposition's case reminds me of a statistics class I took in high school, and the question went something along the lines of, if Timmy was fucking chucking basketballs off the roof and a train was going 20 kilometers an hour, how many watermelons will I eat in the span of an hour? The point is, it's fucking nonsensical, because numbers do not determine life. Yes, I know for a STEM student it might. But unfortunately, life oftentimes is about the serendipitous and the unfortunate encounters. No one predicted, for example, that Russia was going to invade Ukraine. No one predicted that I was going to take 2 shits during the course of today as I was doing prep, for example, during quarterfinals. But the unfortunate thing is, these fucking things happen. And you know why? Because sometimes people are unpredictable. And that was the point of our case, which is why it was insufficient for closing opposition to give statistical analysis to explain why it was unlikely, because we agree it is unlikely, but we say there is a once in a blue moon opportunity by 2100 in which it will happen, and we gave you a series of process analysis as to why that was likely the case. It was insufficient for them to respond in this way. It was far too late for opposition whip to respond. If Tajei wants to respond, he has to take a POI from us, otherwise he loses on the basis of engagement. So, why do we win this debate from closing government? We gave you 2 different sets of analysis as to why nuclear war was likely going to happen. I'm going to start with the first one on Kim Jong-un, because there was 0 lines of analysis in response to this coming from Krish. What was the analysis here from Atlas? Atlas's claim was very simple. Crazy cuckoo individuals like Kim Jong-un are likely going to detonate and utilize nuclear weapons before 2100. And there were a series of structural reasons as to why. The first is because motherfucker's gonna die before 2100, and the vast majority of his legacy existed on the basis of him delivering and creating nuclear weapons, which is why he's gonna fucking fire it. But second of all, if you buy the top half debate, which is like, increasingly the world is interconnected, but resources are running out, it also probably suggests that increasingly he just starts giving less of a fuck about the world because he thinks the world's gonna fucking end anyways, resources are drying up, whatever. So there's less reason for him not to do it, especially if it is the case that the problem within North Korea, for example, is far more likely going to compound. This suggests that he is likely going to press the big red button, either A, because he doesn't give a shit and he's bored, or B, because he needs to uniquely use it as a political tool to rally the people of his country around. The response opening opposition gives towards this POI was a bit inadequate, because they say, well, no, the US can assassinate him. First of all, there is a time lag issue, which is by the time he presses the button and then you decide to assassinate him, the nuke is already flying. So the nuke's gonna fly and it's gonna hit something. So the nuclear war has already started. But second of all, it's unclear why the US is going to do that, both because A, historically they have not prioritized assassination, but second of all, maybe Kim Jong-un just is an incel and lives in a fucking basement and you cannot find him. So it's unclear as to how the efficacy of that was gonna work. It was insufficient for opening opposition to use a one-liner to respond to the entirety of our extension. That is why they fall behind here. The one thing Krish kind of tries to say by the end of the member of opposition to respond to this aspect was like the stuff on religion. First of all, Kim Jong-un thinks he's God, so he is the religion. But second of all, why is the nuke the tipping point? He's fucking slaughtered his own people. He's fucking killed his own family members. I do not think he gives a damn, and as a result of that, religion is not a sufficient deterrent. That is why people like Kim Jong-un are likely going to go batshit crazy. And the point is, when he does do it, and he will do it before he dies, because he wants to leave a legacy, it creates a nuclear war because we agree with Op. The US is not stupid. They're not going to do it. But to the point in which there is a nuclear attack launched at them, or not even them, France, UK, whatever nuclear threat there is, they have to retaliate because one, there's massive political pressure to do so because it is going to be seen as political suicide if you don't respond to a nuke that destroys an entire city. But second of all, it also sets horrible precedents, and as a result of that, you do not want that to happen. This suggests that even if the probability is low, once Kim Jong-un or any individual like Kim Jong-un presses the button, there will be a nuclear war. Zero response from off bench. This is an independent reason why we get ahead. But the second variety of the argument in which we get ahead is to explain why you overtime shift the Overton window, and as a result of that, using nuclear war becomes far more palatable, and as a result of that, it is better. I want to first deal with the closing opposition responses towards this, because the closing opposition argument was to suggest, well, no, but the issue is there's a lot of different types of harms that are associated with nuclear weapon, so it is seen as human atrocity. This is going to sound really lousy, but I think the problem with Op Bench and everyone else in this debate is they just lack imagination. And I'm not going to become a weapons manufacturer, but I just think reasonably at the rate of technological advancement, a lot of things are going to change in the next 20 or even 30 years. For example, we did not realize in the past 10 years that things like artificial intelligence would become possible. We did not realize, for example, lethal autonomous weapons, as opening opposition refers to, becomes possible. But the reason why these things become possible, first of all, is because, as Atlas explains exclusively in Closing Government, there's an incentive from the military industrial complex to develop them. But second of all, uniquely, technology compounds over time. And if the argument Chris explains is that nuclear weapon will be perceived as really risky and deadly, think about how much that is being useful as the basis of knowledge creation to build a additive weapon that is far more dangerous because you're able to use all of the know-hows of the nuke to build a far worse tech. And at that particular point in time, here's why our analysis comes in. Because we explain, first of all, if that ends up happening, then over time, people become desensitized to nuclear weapons. Like, yes, it will be still seen as bad, but if the comparative is that you, like, press the button and an entire country goes away, obviously, a nuke that deals with one city is comparatively seen as better. So over time, no thank you. It's going to be seen as the missiles of yesterday, and therefore people are going to be far more willing to do it. But second and more importantly, I think it is probably the case that presidents and all of these individuals are quite simple-minded. They don't understand the nuances that closing opposition talks about. So if the tech analyst says, hey, we can use this and we'll win the war, they're obviously going to defer to using it in instances in which they think it is politically palatable, and therefore they're likely going to defer towards it. Before I explain why this wins us the debate, opening up.
You can't just win a debate by saying shit happens, guys. The only world where your case works is if Kim Jong-un knows for sure he's seconds away from death and his final wish is to like fuck over the US. Because you better believe that in any other case, Kim knows pretty fucking well that the US will come after him for, the extensive incentive structure that we show you.
Yeah, my guy. So we can win the debate by saying shit happens because an argument is about shit happening. This house will ban zoos. Zoos lead to animals dying. That is shit happening. The shit happening is animals dying. So obviously, that is how fucking arguments work. The reason why this argument works is because, first of all, obviously Kim Jong-un knows when he's dying. Like when you're sick, you can feel yourself getting sick, or you feel yourself getting fatter. Like look at photos of him, right? But beyond that, it probably just is the case that he has incentives to do like this. Like maybe it's not moments before his death, but if he realizes, for example, the world is going to shit or the North Korean regime is going to shit, he will do it. That's why he has threatened to do it in the past as well. The final thing I want to point out here is two things. The first is if the closing opposition response towards this is correct, which is increasingly there are things, for example, like technology that can be used against against nukes, then that is an additional reason why nuke warfare is more likely because it's seen as lower stakes and less mass destruction. And as a result of that actually mechanizes our case. But second and more importantly, all of this contribution mechanizes opening government because it is one, exclusive to the context of why nuclear weapon will be portrayed. And second of all, we nuanced it to 2100. That is why for all those reasons, closing government has to win this debate.
All right, cool. Thank you very much, Govwit. And to close the overall debate now, I'll put here.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Government whip says unlikely things happen. Sure. So if the motion was, this house believes that a nuclear war could happen by 2100, then let's just all go home, right? There's no point. Obviously, it can happen. The point is government needs to prove why it's systemically likely to happen. And there's very little effort to do that in the closing government case, which is why they're sort of out of this debate already. First on CG, then OG. First, CG. The first claim we get from them is that you shift the Overton window of danger, nuclear weapons become perceived as relatively less dangerous, and therefore people are more willing to use them, right?
The first thing I would note is there were lots of things which we have surpassed in terms of technological capability and destructive power, which we don't use, right? Chemical weapons, landmines, phosphorus, Agent Orange, right? Because we just recognize the destructive potential of these weapons, independent of whether or not we have things which are worse, and therefore just don't use them because it's just a terrible thing to do. So I don't think CG can just win by saying there are better things than nuclear weapons and therefore you would use them. Moreover, if nuclear weapons have been so surpassed, then why would you use them? I mean, it's not like we use World War II weapons today just because we think of them as less dangerous than current weapons. We use either no weapons at all or current weapons because they're maximally effective. The third thing I would note on this argument is that it is not in itself an argument, right? All it proves is that it is less unlikely that a nuclear war could happen because of the reasons opposition gives you. It doesn't actually give you positive reasons why that nuclear war would happen in the first place, which is why you shouldn't credit it independently. Finally, on the anti-nuclear technology, no, anti-nuclear technology does not increase the risk of nuclear war because nuclear war requires the attacked state to also fire a nuclear weapon back, which you don't need to do if you have a reliable way of preventing this nuclear missile from landing. Second, on Kim Jong-un and his legacy, right? The first question I want to ask is, who is he leaving a legacy to? Presumably CG means he's leaving a legacy to the North Korean people because the rest of us don't particularly care, right? He can leave a legacy to the North Korean people in any way, right? They believe he was born on a mountain, played basketball at the age of 5, writes, PhDs in nuclear physics and so on. He doesn't need to fire a nuclear weapon to cement his legacy because he has an entire propaganda apparatus to do that for him. Second, if you think he wants the North Korean people to remember him, presumably there need to be North Korean people around to do the remembering, right? And if he fires a nuclear weapon at the US, there won't be any North Korean people around. So even as Kim Jong-un, you would not do this. I want to do a reality check here, right? Because contrary to the assertion of CG, we have been in this position before. We have been in the position where ailing dictators have nuclear weapons. Stalin had nuclear weapons, Khrushchev had nuclear weapons, Andropov, Cherenkov, Gorbachev, they all had nuclear weapons. And the reason they didn't fire them is because dictatorships have ways of dealing with these things, right? Think about the context in which this CG argument happens, right? Kim Jong-un has to be on his deathbed, unable to do anything else or live into the nuclear holocaust, and then order a nuclear strike, right? At which point, there are ways that generals and other military brass in the North Korean establishment circumvent his authority because they don't want to live in a North Korea that has been bombed by the US. This is what happened to Lenin when he became crazy and infirm towards the rest of his life. They continued to pretend that that he had all the authority and continued to give him documents. They just ignored whatever he said because they knew he was crazy. This is presumably what will happen in North Korea as well. So for those reasons, we don't think the CG case is particularly convincing. Before I move on, I'll take the OG point.
Yeah, so a 10% increase every single year, as Chris claims, is 1,399 times more likely in the next 76 years. Also, the response to closing government is just that if Kim Jong-un is going to die, he presumably cares about his heir, and if he's going to die, he's probably not in power anyway, so CG is out of the debate.
Okay, thanks. Moving on to OG. I want to note first that OG engaged in a substantive amount of misdirection. That is, they apply certain reasons to actors who don't actually engage in those reasons, right? Note that, for example, all of the things about long-running ethnic conflicts and all these kinds of things, they need to show how those particularly apply to nuclear-armed states, right? It doesn't really matter whether, there's a long-running ethnic conflict in sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia because there are no nuclear-armed states there. So a lot of the reasons OG gives you, despite them stacking it and it seeming quite intimidating in terms of the quantity of reasons, don't really apply to the particular nuclear armed states that they want to talk about. Second, I just want to get rid of this extraneous point about automatic weapons, which is still hanging on from the PM speech. This is just a lie, right? No country has an automatic nuclear response system because it would be insane, right? Even in the Soviet Union, there was a human in the loop who had to confirm that this was a nuclear strike before they ordered a counter response. So don't let that sort of, distract you from the actual things going on in this debate. There are a few things OG says. First, OG says there are lots of conflicts, and it is probable that during one of these conflicts, a nuclear weapon would be fired. As my member points out, and as many other teams point out in this debate, this is not really an argument in itself, right? And, OG has to sort of uniquely link this to nuclear armed states before it can sort of qualify as a reason. Second, and far more importantly, OG talks about irrational actors. And here they mean things like Iran, North Korea, perhaps even Pakistan, and other countries which might develop nuclear capabilities in the future. The first thing I want to note as a point of framing is that these dictators are often the opposite of irrational, right? They have to sort of scheme and plan in order to get to the places they are. They aren't just your leaders of ISIS or whatever who are just ideologues who get into these places. They actually have to engage in substantive amounts of planning to get into these places. So we don't think that they're actually irrational to begin with. Moreover, as my member pointed out to you, there are substantive reasons why even if you are a dictator of a country like this, First of all, it is very unlikely that you would be forced into a situation where you need to use nuclear weapons, right? The reason is because the actors in this game that we are describing are rational, right? The US is rational when it conducts, perhaps war or foreign policy with actors like Iran and North Korea. And it understands the argument OG makes, that the likelihood of you using a nuclear weapon is higher if you are backed into a corner, which is why the US always gives these countries a way out, right? Even if you agree with the argument of the OG that nuclear war is no longer salient to the American population at large, it is salient to the Pentagon and military brass who are actually making these decisions, right? So that is why, even in the first place, you are not going to force these actors into situations where they have to make these decisions. But secondly, even if they are in those positions, this is not the decision they will make, right? Because there is always a way for the military brass or other people in your country to remove you from power. Notice that the idea of there being mutually assured destruction and no way out applies to these actors as well, right? They know that if the Ayatollah presses the red button or Kim Jong-un presses the red button, there will be no future for them as well, right? Because there's a sort of nuclear counterstrike from the US or whoever it is. And so there is an incentive for them to, at the point where they understand that the country is heading in their direction, or even when the order is given, to either engage in a coup to remove that leader from power, or simply refuse to carry out the order as given, right? That's what happened in the Soviet Union, where superior commanders ordered lieutenants to order a nuclear counterstrike because they thought the US was firing on them, and those subordinates just refused because they knew there was no future for them in a Soviet Union which had suffered a counterstrike from the US. So for those reasons, CO uniquely gives you analysis on these actors, which OO doesn't, about Iran, North Korea, and these dictatorial actors whom both government teams stake their case on. And so for all of those reasons, stand with CO.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much, Opposition Whip, for those very fine remarks, and thank you very much, everyone, for that debate. That is the end of the grand finals. So congratulations once again, everyone, for a very, very good grand finals. The results will be announced at the hall later on the closing ceremony. And